What's up, everyone? We'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Question the Narrative. I'm your host, Ricardo, and I got Daniel Collier with me again today. He came on, I'd say, about 4 episodes ago now, and we were talking about his book, A Reason to Believe. And unfortunately, on that episode, we had some technical difficulties where about the last 30 minutes of our discussion got cut off. I tried to salvage it the best I could. And I know quite a few of you were asking if you could get the final 30 minutes of that discussion, but unfortunately it got lost. And so we had to bring Daniel back on to just chat some more because I know you guys enjoyed that discussion. So what's up, Daniel? How you doing? It's good to have
Hey,
you back
buddy,
on.
what's happening? It's good to be back. Glad to
Yeah,
be catching up with your audience as well. So hopefully we'll have a good
yeah.
discussion and some fun today.
So we'll just hop right into it. I know that your book is talking a lot about the little season and just a lot of how the controllers are working and deceiving us and manipulating us. And one way that I believe, and I think you would agree with me, is that these controllers are manipulating events, our timeline, the Bible prophecies that a lot of them, if not all of them, haven't even been fulfilled yet according to them. Like the book of Revelation, like there's not anything in the book of Revelation that has been fulfilled. We're still waiting on it. And so we're going to get into that because a lot of people have questions about it, like what happened in 70 AD. And if these events already happened, okay, well, what was the mark of the beast? Who was the Antichrist? And you just got a lot of questions from a lot of people. And so we're going to dive in a little bit on that. And mainly, like the character of Nero. Who was he? We know he persecuted a lot of Christians and stuff like that. And he was, alive at that time in the first century when all that stuff was going down. So what are your thoughts on Nero?
Well, everything you're saying, I totally agree with. And they are, from what both of us have investigated and found out, when I say they, someone who's has been very inept in like Babylonian witchcraft or the manipulation of people through even using Christianity. I mean, they have people who have inserted themselves into, we know priests have been inserted, but even into the evangelical arena, you have people who were inserted in there to carry out a message to fool and trick Christians for a modern narrative. I'm saying in the past 70 or 80 years, especially, people have been inserted into the pulpit who, and you can get really into some deep dives with that, but they've been inserted either through secret societies or some of them are even, they are multiples where they have been created through generational witchcraft. And they have split personalities or dual personalities, and they can be two people and not even know it. It's very in depth. It's a lot of stuff Russ Dizdar went into. But anyway, so the narrative now we know is to teach everyone and tell everyone that this Antichrist figure is coming and that there's all these events and places that match Gog and Magog, and Israel's become a nation again, and they're going to rebuild a temple, and they're very focused on this 666 number and looking for whose name matches it and all of that stuff. And a lot of us have become awakened to actually going back and reading the scripture to see what it says, as opposed to following a narrative over the past, I call it the Schofield Bible narrative, over the past 70 or 80 years, this false narrative or this timeline narrative. And you go back and you have John writing the book of Revelations. And at that time, everything was kind of written in code because one, he was already a prisoner on the island of Patmos, and two, these Roman officials would kill their own family for things. Imagine you being a dissident saying something bad about them. You're going to face some kind of torture or death, especially if you're an outsider or a high political figure or a pastor or somebody with influence that could disturb their peace. So, they wrote in either gematria code or language that only certain people might recognize, or if you get accused of a crime, you can say, no, this really means something else. Or so it made it a little harder for future generations, not during that timeline, to discern. But it's very clear as you begin reading the scripture that John was speaking about the Roman Empire. He was speaking about the events to come, and Nero was the emperor at the time. And so, oddly enough, if he's speaking about these events and that he's speaking during that time to those people, he didn't write the book of Revelation for us to read it 2,000 years later and be like, okay, let's discern who this Antichrist is 2,000 years later, because it opposes what Jesus said. Jesus said, I'm coming quickly. Those of you standing here some of you won't taste death before I return. So, they're reading the Bible. We see that Jesus is talking to these people. He's saying he's returning. The book of Revelation says, yes, Lord, return quickly. And so John is writing about this Antichrist figure who's going to do these terrible things and these events that'll take place. And you have Nero, who persecutes the Christians. And during that time, when you're writing about something, the whole world is not this huge place like we have now with the internet. And, when you speak about something, the world means China, and it can mean, Australia and all these places, and large distances away. The things they're talking about can mean the immediate proximity of that area being like the world, or the large place dealing with, the Greek Empire and the Romans and those sorts of things. So oddly enough, not only does Nero persecute the Christians in horrible, torturous ways, his name also adds up to the number mentioned of the beast in several different languages of the time. So the odd thing is because there are those of us, we're not preterists. We don't believe in preterism. We believe the book of Revelation and Jesus' words were talking to the people of that time. And some of the events already took place, and there may be some other events that are still to come, like the great final battle and that kind of stuff. But we don't believe they're going to rebuild a third temple. It doesn't make any sense, because in the Old Testament, when it was talking about the rebuilding of the temple, they hadn't built the second temple yet. So they weren't talking about this magical third temple that would come with Israel. So Israel's a whole nother subject. I don't know if you want to go down that timeline or that issue.
We could, if you'd like, we could.
I'm not a huge fan of. I believe all of this ties into everything dealing with hiding Nero as being the Antichrist. Has to do with the creation of the modern day creation of Israel and Zionism, and fooling Christians. Like in the past 70 years, the idea was to fool Christians to believing we're a second-class citizen in the kingdom. We're the redheaded stepchild of God, and that Israel comes first, and we are supposed to give over anything that happens, no matter what Israel does. They're God's chosen people. It's the apple of His eye. And so they use the Schofield Bible, they use the cover-up of Nero to create this atmosphere where Christians in America especially would support and fund Israel and say nothing about whatever they were doing, whether it was, whether they're killing Christians in Gaza, in Jordan. We're just going to stay silent about that because it's God's will. And I believe all of this has been created as a psyops on Christians. And so I went to seminary school and left because of this reason, realizing that there was a type of propaganda within the teaching of pastors to preach this message. In fact, it could be priority one to make sure that pastors preach the message of supporting Israel. And so anyway, that's all a money thing and funding thing. And then it's also a power thing where they've gotten Christians to stop taking action, to stop running for political office. Just, back in the 60s, you couldn't, Kennedy was he was a Catholic, and it was, since Abraham Lincoln, there hadn't been a president who was a Catholic, and people demanded people in positions running America and stuff that they were Christians of some sort. That was very important. I mean, even if you had had a divorce, that would have been a huge thing as a political figure up until recent times. But I believe all of this comes from the Rothschild creation of Israel and the heavily pushed idea of the Scofield Bible, and getting Christians to believe this Antichrist figure is coming soon, and that it's all God's will, no matter what evil takes place, no matter what Israel is doing to anyone, no matter if a Zionist takes over every single corporation and every single government faction that's torturing Americans to death in financial ways and everything, Christians are to clap their hands and support it. And that's how, my final thought on that is most Christians get a little grumpy about that. They say, there's no way I can't be deceived by this stuff. I would know, God would tell me, it would be revealed. But you look in the book of Revelation and it said, if possible, even the elect could be deceived. And whether that was that time or now, it is possible that the elect, being Christians, can be deceived by this against Christ movement. So that's my final kind of thought on that. But that's where I'm currently standing as to what has taken place and why Nero hasn't been taught in the pulpit, because it's not politically correct to the Zionist Christian movement. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot surrounding that guy, from different things that I've heard, how he persecuted Christians, was it for like 3.5 years or something crazy like that?
Unbelievable. I mean, so, people read the book of Revelation and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, that's like the worst stuff that's ever happened to people, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
if you study anything about Roman emperors, they're pretty sick people, like Caligula and stuff, and Nero was, he was perhaps mentally ill, even getting later on in life. But yeah, he did having Christians hung in his garden and covered in oil and burnt as torches for parties. I mean,
Roman
that's good.
candles.
Imagine the idea of hearing about something like that taking place in any country nowadays. It would be unbelievable, And so the idea of doing that to Christians, that's a pretty sick mind, right? You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
that would match things written in the book of Revelation about how evil this person was. So he had his stepbrother killed so that he couldn't take office. I believe and then his mother, she was pretty evil. She had the uncle killed, and then Nero then had his mother killed. He tried to cover it up and had her put on a ship going somewhere and tried to sink the ship. And when it didn't sink, once she made it back to shore and she'd actually lived, he just had a guard stab her to death. And then he divorced his first wife, and I think he'd gotten another woman pregnant, and he married her. And then in a fit of rage, when she was pregnant, he kicked her to death. And then he went kind of nutty after that. And the Bible talks about, this Antichrist no longer having desire for women, kind of hints around it that people have said that perhaps he was, he could be homosexual or something. And then so Nero then finds a boy who looks similar to his ex-wife, has him castrated, and then dresses him in her clothes, and he then so this concubine boy or whatever becomes basically like his new wife. So that's the level of sickness of his mind, as well as the throwing Christians to the lion, having them skinned alive, all these kind of things, just the unimaginable. He could definitely, even though he died before the final destruction of Rome, like a couple of years, he still matches all of the things that set up that John was writing about, even his name matching 666 and stuff like that. So I can't prove it like you. We weren't there, but it's a pretty good match according to the writings and stuff.
Yeah. And did you ever, or have you ever heard of this thing? It's like a legend about Nero. It's actually called Nero Rendezvous. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
So
Not the name anyway.
Yeah, well, it's a legend about him, and I'll just read it, what it says about it. It says, the Nero Rendezvous legend was a belief popular during the last part of the 1st century that the Roman Emperor Nero would return after his death in 68 AD. The legend was a common belief as late as the 5th century. The belief was either the result or cause of several impostors who posed as Nero leading rebellions. So it's interesting. I was just thinking of that other verse where it says that he'll have a head wound that shall be healed, and there's a legend that he came back after he died. You know what I'm saying?
You never know with these things, because all we have is think about it. We have 2,000-year-old writings of historians, and none of us have personally looked at some old manuscript that was found somewhere. We're relying on a lot of hearsay when it comes to it, and that's why when it comes to a lot of old documentation and stuff, I don't stress about it so much anymore like I used to, because I haven't even read the original document to know whether there's been any funny business ever happen with it. I do know that they got so sick of Nero and everything that he had done, they finally, the Senate or whatever, had hunted him down, and supposedly he killed himself. And whether he was reported alive after that in some instance or something to match having a head wound and coming back or something, I don't know, but I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that there's even a legend around him and what he did. And like you said, he was a ruthless guy, and a lot of people even gave him the nickname as a beast. Like, this guy's a beast. He's no man. He's just not even human. Just I don't understand how he could do that to just people and just torture them like the way he did. It's like he was making war with the saints, like it says. You know what I mean? He slaughtered them.
Whatever caused him to turn on Christians, some people say there was, even in Rome, there was a heavy Pharisaical influence in political realms to help foster and turn political figures on Christians. And supposedly there was a rumor with that just like when Rome caught on fire. I think 2/3 of Rome burnt down. They had, it was a very heavily, like a lot of homes and stuff were crammed into Rome, and whatever caused it, whether Nero had it lit on fire and burnt down on purpose, because it's said the people were very upset that after that he started to rebuild this extremely lavish and larger palace, which made it very suspicious as to whether he had Rome burnt down on purpose. That's and even there's legends that at times he did things and the people really liked him, and then other times people really hate him. I think he maybe he was taken over more in a possessed sense later
Yeah,
on
for
as he
sure.
went crazy, like the Bible talking about, like Satan actually taking over him, because to be that torturous, it's like reading about Vlad the Impaler, and in putting people's heads, in order to shock others. Something made him become so anti-Christ or so against Christ. And I haven't read any stories or legends as to what created that, only that there were people, possibly the Pharisaical class and stuff, who were antagonizing him and getting him to turn more and more against Christians, or to have them blamed for things that went on. And they made a good scapegoat, because most of Rome still worshiped gods, and you had a lot of money and things revolving around the ancient pagan system of doing things. And then so one of the things I learned about was the mark of the beast too, and a lot of people bring that up, and they like to think it's a
Right.
computer chip or something in your
Barcode
forehead.
or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a difficult thing to discern that, because the Bible talks about God putting His mark upon you in your hand or your forehead, and that's not an actual tattoo or a chip or something, when you have ancient
Right.
references to that. But there was,
It does show ownership, though. You know
yeah,
what I'm saying? Like, it's like, oh yeah, he's mine, but it wasn't like a physical substance that was put into your body. It was like a spiritual thing, like
the
God
only
marked
thing
his
I had
people.
heard of is that, so in order to buy and sell, people had, and during that time, whoever the emperor was God. People had to proclaim that that person was both a king and a living God, kind of like the Egyptian, the pharaohs and stuff. And so, in order to buy or sell in the marketplace, people would have to take Nero's mark, and it was some kind of like a stamp, and you'd get stamped with this mark on your hand or your forehead in order to go into the marketplace and buy and sell. And it was a form of also allegiance to Nero. So that's one of the things I had heard too, to buy and sell in the marketplaces. And if you weren't willing to do that, pledge allegiance to Nero and all that, then you couldn't buy or sell. So I don't
Yeah.
know the thing about the cashless society thing that blends into that during that time. That may be a later thing that comes into play in Revelation. Like I say, it can be a timeline thing, but I'm of the belief that Nero and the Antichrist and Jesus' return already took place, and whatever else is going to happen now, the things that are going to happen now, I believe Satan is just recreating his game plan. He's playing out these things now to appear like they are Book of Revelation things. One, so Christians stand down, and two, so he can achieve his evil agenda and build an army to try to combat the return of Christ for the final battle or whatever. And that's a whole nother show in itself,
It is.
getting into that. But I think that is the game plan where we're at, is hide Nero as the Antichrist, make Christians think this Antichrist is still coming and some kind of rapture is going to take place. And so this rapture you're not going to have to worry about all the evil that's taking place. It doesn't matter whether you have all these Zionists take control of stuff, and they openly say that we must eliminate all Christians and we must eliminate all non-believers in order to initiate the return of our Messiah. And so none of that matters. Christians don't have to worry about it, because when all this evil stuff takes place, we don't have to try to fight to stop it. Like the forefathers of America fighting the British to make America safe. They were Christians. We don't have to do that, because all this evil stuff's going to happen, and then Jesus is just going to rapture us. And it's a great psyops to get Christians to do nothing and allow evil to take over their lands and countries. And I tell people, they have been told that you have to bless Israel, right? And then you have to bless this land and bless these people. We've been told that, but the thing is by doing that over the past 70 years, has America become more blessed, or are we more in debt? Have we become more moral, or more taken over by evil things? We're definitely not blessed for what we have done and what the church has been doing. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We're way less healthy, way less family oriented. Everything bad about the breakdown of society has come about in the past 70 years. So I say we're under a Satan's short season evil plan, and the Christian church is, what do they call it? The great delusion, or under a spell, or it's like they have scales over their eyes, and even Christians have been blinded by their own pastors and people to believe a false narrative.
Right. Yeah. So I was that's so true. And I was going back to Revelation 13, where it is talking about the mark, and it says that it's in Revelation 13 13:16, sorry about that. It says, "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name." So like what you're saying, I know that we were saying it may not, like with the Lord, it might not be like a physical thing, like he marks us. But on this, it kind of seems like it would have to be something that you can physically see, possibly, because if you're gonna buy, they have to like confirm, okay, yeah, you got the mark or whatever. But I wanted to point out something right here, because it doesn't say that like he forced anyone to do it either. It says he caused them to do it. So it's just like back in 2020 or 2021 where it got bad, and people were they weren't forced to do anything. They were put in a situation where they were caused to make a decision one way or the other. And so
fear-based mind control, or like a very strong test of your fortitude as to I know exactly what you're saying when you're making terms. It's like it's like this whole thing where you're like, should I do this? Oh my goodness, like I gotta fit in, this whole psychological operation, to see whether you take the mark or not, almost.
Yeah, and it's not a forced to, because that would violate. I think he still has to operate under God's rules. We still need our free will to make a decision, but that's not to say he can't press you on every which way to cause you to maybe make the bad decision.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who felt this same way, but I can remember sitting at my kitchen table, and it was the very first day we heard about, came on the news, social media, whatever, about the whole pandemic thing. And I looked at my wife the very instant that came out, and I looked at her and I said, "This is a hoax. This is the greatest, whatever this is one of the most evil things that's about to take place." I knew it. I mean, immediately I knew what it was, but I'm not saying I had a divine revelation. It's because for 20 years I've been studying their tactics. Since 9/11, I've been studying their tactics and their game plan, and I knew like they were just carrying out one more step in their operation plan. And that's part of why I wrote the book I wrote, was so that anybody that reads it would never get fooled again by anything like this, because they follow this psychological operation to get things done, and human nature hasn't changed. They may use different tactics as far as technology, but it's still the same thing. It's like it's like that unwritten law where they can't like physically grab you and hold you down and give you a shot or make you take the mark, but they sure can put it out there enough to trick you into either desiring it enough or just give in. And
Yeah,
it's almost like an angelic code where the higher ups, the fallen angels, if they live amongst us and stuff, they cannot physically force us. We have to make the decision, just like coming to Christ. You have to make a decision. You're not forced to do it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're talking about all this, and the finer details as to what it was, what it wasn't. You also had mentioned before to me, I think that there was, like even on the coins and stuff, it had his face on there. And if
Yeah.
you guys, for any of the listeners, if you remember when I think it was Peter, he went and grabbed a coin out of the fish's mouth, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then Jesus said, "Whose image and superscription is on it?" So he's saying when the Bible is using the word image, it could be something as small as just the face on the coin. That's what he said. Whose image and
Yeah.
superscription is on it? And he said Caesar. Well, he said, well, render to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
so, I mean,
Yeah.
it
So,
could be
in the Old Testament and things, you were not supposed to make images, graven images of beasts or things like that. So uh, you definitely weren't supposed to have images of men on things either, to worship and the worship of and having money and all of those things of imagery like that. So that falls strongly in the line of the image of the beast.
exactly. That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So, and it's just crazy too, because like you were saying, this whole like the past 70 years or more since the state of Israel was reinvented or recreated, it's just like, well, what was it before it was called Israel? You know what I mean? Kind of thing. Like it's just like, so these people could just come in here and just say, well, this is what it is, and you just trust me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just trust
And
me. Yeah.
and it's just crazy that, like you said, you went to seminary, and this eschatology is not taught anywhere from my understanding. Is that correct? In seminary, they don't teach that any of these events may have even happened, or do they?
Um, if they teach anything about it, it's taught in the form of how to supersede that notion, right? So, the things
Like
that would be
talking
mentioned
points?
about it. Yeah, so it's like, how would you deal with someone who brings this up, and how do you steer them with this proof to make them believe what we want them to believe about this timeline and this how this happened and how that's not true. So yeah, so you might, there's a lot of writing papers and books and stories, and it even gets down to like when you're in school and you have a professor who's highly leaning towards evolution. If you write something totally on the opposite of that, well, you're not going to get as much favor. You're not going to get as good a grade. And so if you have teachers in a seminary school or something that highly lean towards all of these traditional or untraditional, the modern day belief systems, they kind of want you to fall in line because, also pastors are looking for jobs when they get out or get placement and all that kind of stuff. And, it doesn't look too good if you're the rebel, the black sheep of, you know what I'm saying? So it's the same thing like taking the mark of the beast. You can be persuaded to fall down another line. And then if you go somewhere, you've been appointed or assigned, or you get hired at something within your denomination. When you get there, you're under a control grid of the World Council of Churches or United Baptist Association or whatever it is. They're controlling that same narrative. And from what I'm finding out, these huge organizations, since the formation of Israel, are also many times heavily funded or receiving money from Zionist influential things, where top leaders might get them a jet or something like that, So that can get you to lean towards a certain eschatology or theological view of things. And I was under it for many years. I even had a book I had written where I was like all pro-Israel and all of this stuff. And it didn't even occur to me like what had happened I thought I was pleasing God by following this narrative because everyone else believed it. I didn't even start to think to question what I had been taught about it till sometime later. And once it clicked, all of it clicked. And I was like, wait a second. This whole story is not really, somebody's teaching a false timeline here, and it's being done on purpose. Somebody is trying to fool all the Christians who is equally or smarter about the Bible than a lot of pastors. And, the typical response I get is, well, it's Satan. It's the devil. That's the easiest fallback for Christians to say on that. It's very difficult for them to say, this assembly of very powerful rabbis who have all this influence have interjected this somehow through influence and power into the Christian narrative, or they've interpreted this scripture and then they've passed it along, and now it's being taught by some TV evangelist with 30 million viewers, and that has a lot of pulling power to deceive people. And I don't know what we're going to do about it. I sure would like to turn things around. Just from the Christian perspective, I'd like them, like you're doing, to help them understand it. It's very possible Nero is the Antichrist, and the things going on right now in the world are a deception to get us to stand down and not fight back against the evil. And we have to do more than try to vote for a president every 4 years to believe some kind of change is going to take place. Only Christians are going to change this world. I've seen already nobody else is going to do anything because they enjoy what they are given to keep them docile or blinded. They enjoy their football. They enjoy their whatever addiction to things that keep them distracted until they get too old to be effective about doing anything. Anyway, that's my rant on that.
No, that's good. I just think it's crazy. Like you had brought up the politics, right? So even in politics, I'm going to use this analogy. You got Democrat and you got Republican, okay? And you're supposed to believe that one or the other is the right side to be. So it's like they give you only two options. And I forget there's a term for that where there's actually a third option or something. You don't
It's the
only got
Hegelian
these two
dialectic.
options.
The Hegelian dialectic, where they give you two polar opposite things, because what they're really trying to do is, they're trying to move the goalposts. So that you have this two polar, and then so you end up having to meet in the middle. And what they've done is move the morality to this next level, and they keep doing that with this left-right paradigm and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And so just using that same logic, it's like you got this eschatology where you got the pre-tribulation rapture, and then you got these other people that say no, we're going to have to endure through the tribulation, and Jesus is coming after the tribulation. And so those are the two main popular beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that they both assume that all of that is still in our future. Like, we don't even get to entertain the fact that both of you are wrong. And have you ever entertained this third option?
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
not taught. And for as long as I went to like church buildings, like 501c3 tax exempt churches, they don't even entertain this. And they're mostly hardcore pre-trib rapture, like if you're going to like a Baptist place or something like that. But it's not even entertained that, like, hey, let's look at this and see what exactly did happen in the first century. Because in like Matthew 24 and I think Luke 17, Mark 13, all these correlating chapters and books that talking about the same event, like all of that was connected to the destruction of Jerusalem. Like it wasn't like, oh, Jerusalem is destroyed and then we got 2000 years later still waiting for, oh, the armies to surround Israel. It's like, no, that like literally already happened. They surrounded them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You have to think
Like,
about, I mean, so my thoughts on this is you have people, theolog- theologians and stuff, who have doctorate degrees. They've written thesis papers on things. Do you think they can't figure it out, or they don't know? Some of these people who 40 years they've been studying and doing stuff, they know, they're just choosing to accept another path or another way of presenting stuff to people, and it makes me question the reason. Now, I know that I was deceived for a long time, and everyone around me was thinking along the same path. So it's possible they're just like, it hasn't clicked like it did for us, like, whoa, or they're doing it on purpose and they're
yeah,
wolves in sheep's clothing. If you and I can figure it out without having a doctorate degree in theology or something, why can't they figure it out? And what's causing them not to have the Holy Spirit just driving them crazy to tell the truth? Because for me, I can't keep silent about
yeah,
the
yeah,
truth. I have to tell people. I just feel convicted for the body of Christ to know the truth. I can't stand evil to win. Like, that's just how I feel. They can't win. I'm not going to
yeah.
let them.
Right. And I want to bring up another verse that I had thought about. And we were talking about Nero and what he actually did to other human beings and followers of Christ. And we were talking about how it's just horrible, the things that he did. And it's like nothing has ever been like that ever in the history. I don't think, like even if there's persecution today, it's not like it was when he persecuted the Christians. And it just reminded me of the verse in Matthew, it's 24:21. It says, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So if that has already happened, like we suspect it has, it the worst of the worst already happened. Like, it will never be that bad again.
I mean, have you
You know,
ever historically heard of a country en masse taking people, and you have wars and people would go to battle with a sword, and they would stab somebody and then they would die quickly or maybe later, but never in mass have you ever heard in public display where you would take people and hang them and burn them, as lamps for a party, and have a party while that's going on. I mean, there's sick stuff that goes on, but never in mass as a country making public display of people,
Mm-hmm.
torturing them, or I can't think of any other time in history where you would go to an arena or a coliseum to watch a certain group of people, women and children and men, be eaten and mauled alive by wild animals. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Pol Pot was evil. In Russia, they starved to death millions of people, and they might have tortured some in the gulags, but it wasn't public display in mass murdering a certain. The Jewish people they wear you out with the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
But what has happened to Christians over time, or even during nothing in history, as far as torture or oppression, has ever been so great as what was done to the Christians in public. Where
Mm-hmm.
people even went to a coliseum like you'd go to see a football game. They'd go to watch Christians. Imagine the hatred that was taking place, the mentality of the hatred that was
Yeah.
instilled in the Roman populace, to
Yeah.
feel they were
And
going to go be entertained by the
yeah.
death of these people, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so I see like these videos where people will take liberals like now who saw that Donald Trump won the election, and their level of cognitive breakdown, the to where they literally believe the world is coming to an end. Um, that's how people can be programmed without even really thinking about what they're doing in that left-right paradigm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they can't even think. Donald Trump's already been president for 4 years. They were not oppressed and tortured. They weren't thrown in camps, and now all of a sudden he wins again, and they believe the world, like they're going to be oppressed like the Christians were back in the day. They're thrown in a camp or publicly killed. I mean, that's how bad how bad a society, but never in history has any group of people been treated like Christians were treated in the first years like that. Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
It was all in the mind of Nero to be in charge of making that happen. Falls right
Yeah.
in line with Antichrist, like totally against Christ, right? In fact,
Yeah.
hating anything to do with Christ to a maximum extreme. Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy,
And
crazy.
I was thinking about it too. So I know of the mainstream, okay, there's going to be a one world government. That's the mainstream belief, right? One world government, one world religion, one world currency. Um, did did we ever see anything like that back then? And also, like I had thought about this a lot too. Like, does the Bible even say that there's going to be this one world government or this one world religion and all that? Like, where have we got that from? Because I was trying to think back and I can't specifically remember a place where it's kind of hinting at that.
I
Or
can't.
I may.
I mean, yeah, it can hint at it, but I think what
Mhm.
we're getting at is the same. It's a theological jump rope where you're having to do a
Okay.
lot of actions and movements and things to try to make something say something it really didn't. I think it was part of a manufactured ideology. Like, imagine somebody sits down and says, "Look, we need to write a script." It's 70 years ago, and somebody says, "Look, we need to write a script to get Christians to fall in line with all of this belief system, and we're going to teach it from the pulpit, and we're going to get them to believe all of this stuff, uh, uh, get them to believe all of this stuff," and they just kind of they'll pull something from a 4,000-year-old scripture, something out of Isaiah, and then they'll pull some other scripture somewhere and try to blend it all together and make it about current times and make it all seem like it matches. And to the less discerning and the people that really trust a pastor or trust a religious group, uh, they want to please God so much that, and they want to feel like I'm being a good Christian, and then they believe this because it's repeated and everyone around them believes it, and they talk about it in Sunday school, and then it becomes fact to them. And then I
Hmm.
forget the term, but it's when someone tells you what something is before you actually see it, so that you don't. It's like so that you don't perceive what it really is. It's like when you look at the mesas, um, and you look at like Devil's Tower, and you're looking at it, and they've pre-told you since you were a kid that structure came from a volcano, or it was a natural geologic formation. And but if you had never been told that when you were a little 5, 6, 8 years old, and you saw it for the first time, you'd look at it and go, that thing looks like a giant tree stump.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if you put a tree stump next to it, it's almost identical. And then the whole
Hmm.
structure itself has these crystalline formations or structures that look just like cells where water would come up into a tree, or a silica based tree or something. But you've been preemptively programmed before you ever could figure it out theologically. You're still in that stage where you're drinking milk, and you can't handle meat as a Christian. And some
Hmm.
pastor with 40 years, and he leads the church, and he tells you what it is. And then from that point on, even though you're reading it, you're not discerning it as to what it's really saying, because you're like, well, he's already told me and he's smarter. So I think these things you're talking about are part of a narrative that was constructed, packaged up, and delivered uh, in a Edward Bernays style psychological programming, like an advertisement for the whole thing. Like an ad campaign was run, and then it was preached to the church for the last 70 years. And now a majority of Christians, millions and millions of Christians, are preemptively programmed to this ad narrative of this whole coming rapture and all of that stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's a lot of good points, and I obviously agree with you, because we were told what was in the Bible and how to interpret it before we even read the Bible. And so
That's
we,
right.
like you said, we have all these preconceived notions of what's in there, and maybe it's not, once you start studying for yourself, it's like, well, wait a minute, like that doesn't really match up to what I've been taught my whole life, you know what I mean? So once you actually read it and study it for yourself, it sometimes it says a lot different than what we've been told.
It's like even when
Um,
you read stuff written in Aramaic or Greek, it's much more powerful and in-depth meaning. Like agape, when it talks about love, we say love, but it may say agape love, which is a form of very, very deep love, like a mother would love a child type of love. And so
mhm,
just reading scripture and things in original language and stuff can have a deeper meaning. And then a lot of times there
right.
were stuff like, for example, we've teaching Christians to be extremely passive. I don't agree with this. I agree that I think that we are supposed to be power under control. Um, the word
That's what
meek
I was gonna say. Yeah.
really means it's representative of a soldier in full armor on a battle horse, and he's under the control and the authority of the general or the king or whoever. And so as a Christian, you are power under control. In other words, you are not, like running wild. So, and it's the same thing with, so they've tried to teach the word meek to Christians as a stand down word to make us passive and weak and not doing anything, not standing up to evil and stuff taking place. And they'll use the whole narrative as to, like, if someone comes up to you and the turn the cheek thing. If somebody slaps you on the cheek, to turn the other cheek, as a form of passiveness. But
Yeah.
in ancient Hebrew and stuff, that it was it was kind of like the old movies where somebody would come up with a white glove and they would slap you on the face with a white glove. And it was a form of insult. It wasn't somebody smacking you and
Yeah.
you being weak. They would come up and do something as a form of insult to you. And it was telling you, hey, just because somebody insults you or says rude things, you're not to, like, as a Christian, you're not to take that and go off and be angry and be out of control. But they turned it around to make it a pacifist thing, into
Yeah.
same stuff we're talking about, the preemptive programming, telling you something that doesn't really mean that, and turning you into a pacifist, or to believe certain things about Scripture that aren't really saying what they're saying.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I wanted to bring something else up, and you had mentioned it at the beginning of this discussion here, but you were talking about the whole third temple deception, and I know that there's a lot of people that are on YouTube now that are preaching the futurist uh, eschatology, and Israel's getting ready to build a third temple, and they're getting the red heifers ready, and it just looks like everything's lining up. And the verse that I think that they are getting this from is in Second Thessalonians chapter 2, and I'm just going to read it real quick. It's saying, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worship, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And then he says, remember ye not that when I was with you, I told you these things? And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, and only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. So even then, he's saying the mystery of iniquity is already at work. And so these verses here, obviously, because there's no temple, no one will argue that there's no temple right now. So in order for this to be true, well, of course, if this hasn't happened, of course we need a third temple. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that's where they're getting that from. So is there any, like, going back to Nero, is there any proof, which I've heard a few things, but I'd like to hear what you have to say, is that Nero actually stood up in the temple of God, the second temple, and claimed himself to be God? Do you know anything about that?
No, no, I don't know anything. Like I say, we've got 2,000 years of history and things that were written. Um, and, I don't know of anything from Josephus or Tacitus or anybody who might have written something, and I haven't heard of anything written like that,
Mm,
to say that Nero went into the actual temple. But it also could be allegory, in a way where, he proclaims himself to be God on earth,
mhm.
proclaiming himself to be God, and and he's taken the place, and he's actually persecuting the Christians, claiming that he's God, not Jesus. And whether it meant the physical temple that he went into, or allegorically talking about the fact that, because the Jews would go into the temple and that's how they did their worship and all that stuff. And then after Jesus came, the temple became the body. Uh, no longer, did you have to
Yeah.
go into the temple and stuff. So I don't know for sure, because when you get into those things in the writings, it gets beyond, and it was written on purpose to be kind of a little bit of a mystery.
Hmm.
Like I said, when John was writing stuff about 666 and the Antichrist and stuff, it was meant to be a bit of a mystery, because, of course, if he wrote the letters to people and they were out proclaiming it, well, that meant instant death, because they would be
Yeah.
opposing the Caesar. So
Yeah.
I don't know of any actual writings that we could proclaim as a fact that happened.
Right.
It would be more rumored writings. If it was
Yeah.
out there, it would be more prevalent for us to find and say, hey, look, this writing that was discovered during with the Dead Sea Scrolls had this written within it, and hey, wow, isn't that cool? I don't know of anything uh, uh,
Yeah.
physically
So
about that.
yeah, so two things. One thing that you said about him proclaiming himself to be God or whatever. Herod in the book of Acts, he didn't really proclaim himself to be God, but in Acts chapter 12, he's giving a speech or something, and then all the people are saying, it's a voice of a God and not a man. And then all of a sudden, boom, God strikes him dead and he's eaten of worms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like he put it, that just reminded me of that. I don't know, but he's
Hmm.
put in his place real quick. But
Yeah.
um, one thing that I was thinking about, like not necessarily that Nero stood in the temple of God, but about like the abomination of desolation, that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24. And I had heard that he sacrificed a pig or something like that. Did you
Yeah.
ever
Now I have
hear
heard all
something?
about that stuff where they had, pigs were like pigs to the Jews and things were like the dirtiest of any, that would be the absolute most disgusting thing that could be brought into the temple. And
Hmm.
yes, I have heard about as a form of rebellion and everything. They brought in sacrificed a pig on the
Hmm.
altar and stuff like that. That would be an abomination of desolation. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I have heard about that and writings about that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. There's just a few things that I had heard, but yeah, just going back to the whole temple thing, it's just crazy that people read into it like that. Like we were saying, we were told what the Bible said before we ever read it ourselves. But in the book of Daniel, the second temple wasn't even up when he was
Right.
describing that event. So and I've even the insanity of it also is that I've even heard people say that exact thing, but somehow they think that in the New Testament or something that it's being talked about a third temple when they admit at the time that this was written there wasn't a second temple up. I'm like, whoa, like how, like it's just that blindness. Like how can you not make that connection? It's just like there's just this separation where they can't
It's
see
part
that.
of that. It's part of that preemptive programming. Even I'll tell you so you see all of our presidents, you see all these political figures. It's a huge event in Israel, and they'll go to the Wailing Wall and pray. But if you read Jesus's words, he said that this you see this temple, it's going to be torn down, and not one stone will be left standing.
Hmm.
And the history, I have read writings about when the Romans destroyed the city and the temple, they tore that place apart. Not one stone was left. They dug up things, they tipped over the stones looking for temple treasure, looking for any hidden place that gold would be or any kind of gold was inlaid and stuff. They leveled that place also looking for um, gold. So and their hatred towards the Jews and their constant rebellion, and the Romans are getting friends killed in the battles and stuff, and they're pretty grumpy at these Jews, and they've had enough of them. So that temple represented the Judaism, so they wanted to tear every bit of that down to nothing. And now they go and they claim that this place and this wall is what's left over uh, of the ancient temple, but it's from my understanding of history, it was an ancient Roman temple to Jupiter. And so here they are, praying and at this wall saying they're praying to God, but it's at a temple wall to Jupiter, which is Zeus, which is Satan. So that's
Yeah.
not so cool to me because I know that these Kabbalists and these rabbis know that. They know their history, they know the land, they know what that place is, and they know who is being prayed to. So I'm not so cool with that, and I don't like it when our leaders go over there and go to the wall and whatever, put their little prayer to whoever the God is they're talking to there. So
Yeah, and that was my exact argument too whenever I I heard about that or knew about it, and in light of the little season and everything,
mm-hmm.
that there's no way that that could actually be a temple wall, because if it is, then Jesus is a false prophet and then he's not the Son of God, because he said, like you just mentioned, that there shall not be one stone left upon another that shall not be thrown down.
Yeah,
So if that's the case and there's still remnants of that temple up, well, just like Paul said, like if Christ didn't raise from the dead, then you're still dead in your sin. Like you and I are still in our sin. Jesus was a false prophet.
yeah,
He wasn't the Son of God, because if he, like a lot of people have said, if you get one thing wrong, I mean, it even says in the Bible, like if you get one thing wrong, you're a false prophet. You have to be 100% accurate. If you're
yeah.
hearing from God and God cannot lie, God is right, then you're going to be 100% accurate. So even
From
calling,
my understanding, a false prophet, if somebody said, I come in the name of God, and he said this and that, and it didn't come true, they'd kill you.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And even if the prophecy came true, this was another aspect to it. If the prophecy came true, but it was actually leading you away from God, then that was considered a false prophet as well, which was punishable
yeah,
also by stoning or whatever. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, if that's the real wall, then we're still in our sin,
I,
which is kind of
so,
crazy to say.
have you ever seen the basement of that place? Like, have you ever seen underneath of that area what they consider the basement or the substructure? Um,
No.
it's it's megalithic stones under there, under that. I've seen a walkthrough, and I remember looking, and so as they're walking through whatever tunnel they're going through of the underneath of that structure, megalithic stones. I'm talking about stones that look like half the size of your house and stuff like that underneath. Which I don't know at that time if they were moving those or not, or if it was an earlier culture, but yeah, pretty incredible. Whoever constructed um, that thing. So there's a lot of weird stuff with the Second Temple and King Solomon and the construction of that temple. We don't have to get in today, but that's dealing with him calling up other entities and angels and stuff like that to build that temple.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that's a whole weird thing in itself.
Yeah, and also at the beginning of this episode, we were talking about Israel and how it was uh, basically rebirthed as a nation in order to make these last end time days seem more believable to Christians, right? But if those are if that's really Israel and those are really the Jews, then there has to be 12,000 from each tribe, right, that still exists there today. But in my honest opinion, they none of them would even know what tribe they came from. They don't have any of those receipts. Whereas, like in the first century, they all knew. Like Paul even said, I like he knows exactly who he is, what tribe he's from, and there was just no
Yeah,
debate. But whereas today, like that is impossible in my opinion. And then not only that, like these people, so like I know the Muslims and all that, they get a bad rap up there in the Middle East, but the Muslims, from what I understand, they at least believe in Jesus to the extent that he's highly regarded as at least a prophet, right?
Yeah,
But
like
whereas
Isaiah or something, you know?
yeah, but the thing is they get such a bad rap, but then everyone has to support Israel, and the Jews are over there, which they have nothing but harsh and terrible words that probably shouldn't even be repeated about our Savior.
And the
And
Talmud,
and
yeah.
and we're supposed, yeah, and so that's God's people, you know what I mean? And it's just it's hard for me to wrap my mind, and it's like almost like the roles have been switched with Islam and I guess the Talmudic Jews, like you said, like you support these people who hate Jesus, who hate Christians, and even I've heard that I don't, they're making it illegal maybe to uh, preach the gospel over there and stuff like that,
Yeah,
but
if you go to Israel, you got to think, let's say America, so America gives Israel uh, $90 billion a year, between 40 and 90 billion, depending on the year. So they don't mind letting you come over and walk around on their dusty rocks for $90 billion a year for a while. But watch any videos where a Christian is on the street talking about Jesus or something like that. I mean, you'll have, 8, 9, 10, 15-year-old Orthodox kids throwing rocks at them, screaming at them, rabbis like, uh, cursing them to leave and things like that. Even at the Wailing Wall, you'll have people screaming, these Orthodox people screaming, "Go home, we don't want you here." And the military will actually have to show up, or the police will have to show up to protect the Christians from these Orthodox people getting so outraged. The whole population is not like that. People think that when I say stuff like that, uh, that I'm being anti-Semitic or something like that, which is another
yeah,
ridiculous term, because 90% of the Jewish population, people claiming to be Jews, the the Hebrew geneticists did studies on, and 85 to 90% of Jews have never had an ancestor in the Middle East. They're all converts from like Khazaria and different places, or Spain, intermarrying, or the great great grandfathers converted, and they have no genetic Semitic background. Now, I'm sure there's a few. Let's say you have a priest class of people, and they've been rabbis or priests for 2,000 years. They probably can track their genealogy going back. But you're talking about a very teeny, teeny, tiny percentage. And so statistically, by their own records, almost 90% have no Semitic background at all. And yet they're screaming, "This is my land. God gave it to me." That's how ridiculous stuff is. So I'm not anti-Semitic. I was with a Jewish girl for probably 7 years of my life. We were going to get married and all this stuff. So I'm not anti-Semitic at all. I'm anti-Zionist, and I'm anti-false prophet, and anti I'm against anything that's actually secretly plotting against Christians and the kingdom of God. And that's partially what all of us are trying to wake the Christian church up to, is that there literally is a plot. The Rothschilds, it all started back in the 1890s, but there's been a plot to create a central location out of Israel. And of course, if you were Satan and you wanted to kind of put things in, like say, "Hey, I'm gonna get these men to put this in your face, God. We're gonna come back to Israel, and we're gonna rebuild this against God place and have a central hub, and then we're going to control the world from there, and we're going to get the Christians to fund it and think they're doing the right thing while we're working to get rid of them."
yeah,
It's like the ultimate in your face witchcraft spellcast thing. that's going on. And I was under it. So, most of my Christian life, I didn't realize it. And I was under the spell. So I can't say that, it's not like my whole life I was like, no, I never
Yeah.
believed that. I completely was in line. I just woke up to it. By whatever means, I woke up and I realized what they're up to. I realized they're covering up Nero. They're making us think. They're making us think that all of this stuff that's happening is part of God's plan and His will to have this Antichrist figure come, and that at some point in time we can't complain about what the Jews are doing, or even if they align with the Antichrist and want to cut off all the Christians' heads, it's okay because it's part of God's plan. So even if they come for your little child and want to kill your child, eventually it's going to be okay because some of them might convert and believe in Jesus later. That's the most crazy thought process that Christians are under, the spell that they are under. And I call it the Judas theory, where most of Christianity is actually become Judas. They have gone back to the scribes and Pharisees and are under the spell, and they didn't even get 30 pieces of silver to do it. And they've gone back to join themselves with the scribes and Pharisees. And so I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm trying to wake Christians up as to where they stand, because they've aligned themselves against Christ. And that doesn't mean all Jews at all. Like I say, some Jews are oblivious to this. They're not even religious. They're just doing their everyday thing. They're some of the coolest people I know. I've got friends who are Jewish, but they're not Pharisaical Zionists involved in this movement. So
Right.
I think that's a clear point that has to be made, is that when you talk about this, you're talking about this higher echelon of the rabbinical scribes and Pharisees class, who controls the people under it, much like the Catholic Church. Your neighbor could be the nicest person, and they're Catholic, and they don't have a clue about what control mechanisms or Antichrist stuff's going on. And I think that falls in line. So these are thoughts I have at 3:00 in the morning type of stuff, where I think sometimes about these nations who have had to kick 150 different nations have had to kick the Jewish population out of the country for subverting the government. That's a lot of countries, 150 over the past 2,000 years, that you read about, where they enter in as they come in, like migrants or something. They've been kicked out of somewhere. They go into another country, hat in hand, form their groups, and then the next thing you know, they find ways to take over government positions, to take over places, and then they start the banking and the usury, and then they destroy that country. And it's when the country finally in this despot state that they realize, hey, this group of people is behind all this. Now we got to kick them out. And what a difficult thing, as I even read from the times of, the rise of Germany during the time before World War II, where they did everything they could to give them all their money and let them go to Israel or just get out of Germany. And so they didn't, they make them out as being like this. You had a nation of Christian people, mostly. Germany was a kind of a Christian nation. They had ancient churches and all this stuff. They tried to get them just to leave. And I believe the problem they ran into was, you had Bolshevism going on, and then you had rebellions taking place. They didn't want, you had people who had jobs and businesses, and they didn't want to leave. And it's a difficult thing in the position we're in, even as Christians in America, because I think we are facing the same problem. Almost every single organization up until the presidency and the czar positions are being occupied now by Zionists. dual citizen Zionists. You should
Yeah.
never ever have anyone in a government position who holds a citizenship to another country.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went kind of on a rant with that as
No,
we
no,
blend
you're
in
fine.
from then to now, but it falls in line with this against Christ system, and realizing at the highest echelon, the religious people pushing the narrative, it's about getting rid of the Christian nations in order to uh, eventually destroy Christians, get rid of them so that this other Messiah they want can be put in place. So that's why all the migrants and all these people have been flooded into the Christian nations, and Jewish family services and all these groups are picking them up at the border and flying them into cities and busing them in because there is a narrative behind all of this deception that started 70 years ago. So I know that's a
Yeah.
little off topic, but I floated.
No, 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 you're fine. And so for someone who isn't familiar, because I know that even in the Bible, it talks about Zion, which is the city of David, and you got like Mount Zion. And so they're using biblical terms to maybe have some sort of trigger in our brains about Zionism or whatever, or I'm a Zionist, and it's just like, well, I mean, it talks about that in the Bible, and so what could be wrong with that, and
Yeah,
whatever, you
yeah,
know what I
you're
mean?
right. Yeah.
So what would you say to those who maybe be like on the fence like that, like because they are using biblical terms? So like in a nutshell, unless you feel like you've gave it enough justice, like like today, who is a Zionist and what is Zionism? And why is it that it's so bad or whatever, like how everyone says, for the skeptic?
So even the word Jew is a it's like a psyops in itself. Uh, if you say someone's Spanish, you can say, oh, they were born in Spain and they are of the Spanish nation and whatever. You can identify someone, but the word Jew in itself is a psyops. Everything around, the word Jew didn't even exist. There wasn't any J's in the language. You were from Judea, and Judea meant that you lived in this country. And in the country of Judea, there were a multitude that came out of Egypt, a mixed multitude, and ended up in Iodea, which was the Greek word for the place. It wasn't a race of people, a singularity race of people. You might have, even King Herod was a half breed, right? So you have all these people that intermarried in Babylon and whatever. So the words and the things being used like Zionism, it's part of spellcast. Okay, so you got to understand these people, they don't just study religious books like the Talmud. The Talmud is a bunch of writings by rabbis that Jesus condemned. It was oral then, but they also follow the Babylonian, like the Kabbalah. They follow
Right.
ancient understandings of witchcraft and manipulation of um, the manipulation of situations or using words to alter people's thinking. It's grimoire. It's the ancient forms of witchcraft, but not like Disney where you have a witch throwing frogs in a pot. We're talking about the highest levels of like things like Enochian magic, things that were handed down by angels given to men on how to manipulate times and dates and seasons and physicalities of stuff. And that's an oddity in itself because a lot of Christians don't believe in magic or something, but we also believe you can pray and axe heads can float, or withered arms can come back restored, or people who can't walk suddenly miraculously can be healed and they can get up and walk. So, the sun can stand still in the sky and not move for a day. We believe in these things, but when it gets into the side of witchcraft or other people manipulating things, we almost believe that that's not possible. But
Right.
it's absolutely possible, because if good things can be done from a Christian point of view, then don't think that evil things, because we know, like Janus and Jambres, when it came to Moses, they threw their staff down and turned to a serpent. The other side knows how to manipulate this matrix as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening to Christianity through words like Zionism, of course, they're taking the psychology of Christians wanting to be good people, doing good things and pleasing God and doing the right stuff. They're using those words as a psyop, like a spell cast on you, to introduce something negative and an agenda. It comes right out of how to market and advertise to people and get them to buy things or do things they may not normally want to do. And it's just because marketing and advertising is spell cast in itself. It's the same thing with those terminologies and words being used on us. It's a form of spell cast to manipulate your good nature to get you to join something that may be evil, and you think you're doing good. But that's what I think joining. They used. It's like I just did a show on this about how the words in media that liberals conjure up using spellcast, like a women's right to choose. Instead of calling it abortion, they call it a woman's right to choose. Or when it comes to like a conservative thing, like freedom, when we had the Patriot Act come out, the last thing it was patriotic, or for the best of America.
Yeah.
They're terms where if you try to speak about them or say anything against it, just the spell cast in itself makes you seem like you're the evil one, right? That's how trickery works. We go to school and we learn how to spell. Right away, we're learning how to spell, and then we learn how to write, which is a right. A right comes from witchcraft. And we learn grammar, which is grimoire, which comes from the French book of writing out these things in sentences, which you sentence somebody to something, you cast a spell. Everything we have learned, we learned it, but never put a thought to how all of that goes together. So some people might call it Christians. I've even heard it said, well, Christians practice a white witchcraft and the dark side does dark witchcraft. If you're calling it witchcraft, you're just basically manipulating, I heard a guy do, I don't know if you were on that podcast or not. He was talking about quantum computers and quantum reality, and how when it came to like Jesus was God entering into this matrix or this quantum reality we live in, and he was giving us cheat codes and the names and the different things to do and say
that was
to
our
heal people.
Mandela effect.
Yeah. So anyway, that's like a lot of subjects. I'm sure people's heads will explode if they haven't learned all this stuff before or even thought about it. But the words you're talking about, they're using them as spellcast, where they have a dual meaning. The Bible talks about having a dual heart or a double meaning or double think and stuff. That's having a double-minded man and stuff. It means like you might be saying one thing and thinking another. That's how spellcast works, and that's how Zionism works. Zionism seems like, hey, the Jews have a right to go back to Israel, and they have a right to live autonomously on their own and build a place and blah, blah, blah. But on the dark side of that, what it's really meaning to the people who created all of this stuff they gave us, it means they're going to form a central location for them to dominate and rule the world, and to initiate and usher in their belief that their Messiah is going to come after they rid the world of the Christians and the non-believers and the Muslims. Then that's what it really means to them. and they've got you believing and saying a word that you think it's good, and to say anything against it makes you look like the bad one.
Right.
Which is Hegelian dialectic and, problem, reaction, solution, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Well, man, it's been a great episode. We're gonna have to hop off here. We're
All right.
getting about to that mark, but I've
I hope we didn't make
thoroughly,
people's heads explode on this one.
yeah, you might have to listen to this one a couple of times. We covered a lot of topics, a lot of interesting stuff, guys, and we obviously we don't claim to have all the answers. We're just questioning the narrative, like the podcast,
Yep.
and so we just don't believe at face value everything that we've been told. Just dig a little deeper yourself, and you may come to a different conclusion than what you've been told. But do you have any closing statements, Daniel, before we get off?
So, I'll tell people if, in regards to the book I wrote the book simply so that you can understand exactly, or get at least a beginning level of understanding how all of this stuff works, so that you can't be tricked anymore by the use of language, by the use of spellcast words, how all of this stuff is a trick. And so I wrote that book to be a code breaker for you. So that's called Reason to Believe, and I can give you a link or something like that. And then just recently, I formed a group on School where you can come and join for free, called the Truth Council. And then it's people all over the world who have come there, and they talk about stuff like we're talking about, without commercials and without trolls and all that kind of stuff. So if you go on School, SKOOL, you can join the Truth Council, and there's other, like I say, Australia and South America people have joined, and you can get on there, and it covers a lot of subjects from health, like true health, and how they're trying to poison us, to these topics of mud flood and Tartaria and the millennial reign, all that kind of stuff. So that would be my closing comments. Other than that, I think that's probably enough for people today. It's a lot of
Yeah,
subjects, and some of them may even actually make people kind of angry. At one time I would have been mad about people talking about Israel, talking about some of
hmm
them. So I'd be like, oh, that guy's a heretic, and whatever. I would have been the same way. So I understand.
yeah, yeah. And it's not even just real quick before we head off, just to touch a little more on that. It's not that we're even, or you're even saying anything bad about just the general population that lives in that plot of land, because a lot of them may be ignorant to just like the people here, normal people, just, you said they're distracted with other things in life. And so they don't really know what's going on, but it's just that few that rules
Yeah.
the many, I guess you can say.
Most
That's
most
who
of the
you're
people
talking
living in
about.
Israel, they don't even, they're like, it's like here. You have a left and a right, and most of them don't even like the
Yep,
government. Most of them are kind of not religious. So what we're talking about is that echelon of evil. Okay, so
exactly. Yeah, yeah, and I just wanted to make that clear, because I don't think that way. I know you don't either. We're just talking
no,
about
not at all.
those, that few group of people that rules the many, that are have a lot of power, a lot of money, a lot of influence. But other than that, man, I mean, it's been awesome having you back on, and we're gonna have to get you on again whenever you're free. I love having these conversations with you. But love everyone. Thank you all for listening and for all your support, and God bless.